The moment I saw the flashing red and blue lights bouncing off my front windows, I knew this was no ordinary neighbor drama. I stepped onto my porch just in time to see Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, practically dragging two officers up my driveway, one arm flailing and a Ziploc bag clutched in the other. She was screaming loud enough for the whole street to hear. "There it is right there. He is a drug dealer. I caught him red-handed." She pointed at a small plastic bag, half buried near my mailbox, her face lit with the triumph of a conqueror. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains whispering. Some even filmed on their phones. What Karen did not know, what nobody here knew, was that I was not some random homeowner. I was a DEA Special Agent who spent the last 8 years dismantling cartels, so framing me with a baggie of cheap street junk was not just reckless, it was suicide. I tightened my jaw, forcing down the laugh bubbling in my chest. If Karen thought she had just scored a win, she was about to find out that she had just detonated the worst mistake of her life. 2 weeks earlier I had moved into Willow Creek Estates, a pristine manicured neighborhood that marketed itself as the safest place to live on the east side. The houses were identical in that comforting corporate suburban way, with bright green lawns, flower beds lined with solar lights, and mailboxes shaped like little birdhouses. It was perfect for someone like me laying low while working a sensitive undercover case at a nearby port. My cover story was simple: recently transferred accountant, quiet introvert, no drama. The first few days had been blissfully uneventful until the HOA President introduced herself. Karen wore a pressed pink polo shirt, white khakis, and a name tag that read Community Wellness Coordinator, a title she had clearly invented for herself. Her smile was stretched tight over teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. She informed me that Willow Creek had strict standards and that the HOA took them very seriously. She handed me a binder thick enough to stop a bullet and told me to read it cover to cover. I thanked her politely, mentally noting that her overzealousness was something to watch. The first fine came 3 days later, a yellow slip pinned to my door citing me for failure to remove nonconforming flora, referring to the potted cactus I had placed on my porch. I laughed it off, paid the $50 fine, and thought that would be the end of it. It was not. Over the next week, citations piled up. Grass too long 3 inches over code. Mailbox too faded. Trash can visible from the street for more than 4 minutes. Each fine came with a knock at my door, Karen standing there with a smug smile and a new absurd complaint. But it was not just the fines. I noticed Karen hovering outside my house at odd hours, pretending to jog, but always slowing down as she passed my windows. She would talk loudly on her phone about how some people were bad for property values. I caught her peeking into my backyard more than once, her little dog yapping as she tiptoed along the fence line. It would have been funny if it was not so invasive. My instincts kicked in. This was not just nosiness. Karen was building something, a case in her mind, a story where she was the righteous hero rooting out evil from her perfect community. The final straw came on a bright Saturday morning. I had just finished mowing my lawn when I noticed a disturbance by the mailbox. A small hole freshly dug and something glinting in the dirt. Before I could investigate, Karen appeared out of nowhere, phone in hand, yelling as if she had just uncovered a major cartel bust. I bent down and brushed the dirt aside, revealing a plastic bag with a few sad-looking white pills. It was so sloppy, so amateurish, that I almost felt insulted. The cops arrived quickly, obviously tipped off by Karen, who had probably been dialing them the second she left her house. She stood with the officers, acting like a star witness. I played my part, feigning confusion, stammering about how I had no idea where the drugs came from. The officers looked skeptical but procedural. They took photos, bagged the evidence, and started asking me standard questions. Karen chimed in repeatedly, offering unsolicited commentary about how she had seen shady people coming and going from my house, and how she always knew something was off. Inside, my head gears were turning. I had everything I needed. What Karen did not know was that my entire property was wired with high-definition motion-activated cameras, a precaution from my past busts, and that every second of her little excavation had been recorded. Even better, I had an encrypted bodycam hidden in the porch light capturing her planting the evidence and staging her fake discovery. My plan was already forming. As Karen continued her performance, I fought the urge to smirk. She was so certain she had won that she could not see the trap closing around her. Her downfall was going to be spectacular. But for now I played along, letting her dig her own grave one dramatic lie at a time. I could see neighbors whispering nervously, watching from their porches, unsure whether to believe her or me. That was fine. They would soon have front row seats to the most satisfying public takedown Willow Creek had ever seen. The officers eventually told Karen to step back so they could question me privately. As she strutted away, her ponytail bobbing smugly, I caught a glimpse of her dog lifting its leg on my lawn. Perfect. Even her dog was a little tyrant. I shook hands with the officers and invited them inside. As we crossed the threshold, I smiled. For real this time. Showtime. Inside my house, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The two officers who had been borderline suspicious outside now stood awkwardly as I closed the door and turned toward them. Without a word, I walked over to the living room console and pressed a hidden button behind a framed picture. A soft click sounded as the wall panel slid aside, revealing a small high-tech security station complete with multiple monitors and a recording hub. Their eyes widened. I reached up, grabbed my DA badge from the hidden shelf above, and flipped it open so they could see it clearly. Their expressions flipped from cautious to stunned in an instant. I introduced myself properly as a DEA Special Agent currently operating undercover on assignment and explained briefly that this situation had compromised my operation, but that it also gave me an unexpected opportunity. They listened carefully, both now visibly nervous about how badly they could have mishandled things outside. I reassured them that so far they had done everything procedurally correct, but I needed their cooperation to take Karen down the right way. I queued up the footage from earlier that morning. The screen flickered to life, showing Karen sneaking onto my lawn at dawn, nervously glancing around. She bent down near the mailbox, dug a small hole with a gardening trowel, and buried the plastic bag before dusting her hands off theatrically and scurrying back to her house. It was crystal clear, no ambiguity, no room for doubt. The officers leaned closer, one muttering under his breath something not quite polite. I showed them a second angle from the porch light camera just for good measure. Karen's face was perfectly visible, twisted into a sneaky grin as she completed her dirty work. That was not all. I handed over my phone, where I had just received a text from my friend Mark, who lived down the street. Mark worked in cybersecurity and had been keeping tabs on the neighborhood network. He had intercepted a voice message Karen had sent to another HOA member bragging about how she had finally gotten rid of the neighborhood drug problem and how sometimes you had to bend the rules to protect the community. It was almost too easy. Still, I knew we had to be meticulous. We discussed strategy. We needed Karen to hang herself further, preferably in a way that made her guilty beyond just planting evidence. I suggested we give her enough rope to gloat, thinking she had succeeded. The officers agreed and promised to start preparing an official report to escalate to the local district attorney. Meanwhile, I made a few quiet calls to my own agency contacts to let them know there had been a small change of plans. Originally, my assignment here was to monitor smuggling activities through the local shipping yards, but sometimes real life handed you an unexpected bonus mission. For the rest of the day I played dumb. I mowed the lawn again, waved to neighbors, acted jittery when Karen strutted by on her evening walk, smirking triumphantly. She kept her distance, but I could feel her vibrating with satisfaction like a dog that had finally buried its favorite bone. That night I met secretly with Officer Daniels and Officer Ruiz, the two officers who had responded earlier. We agreed to set up a formal emergency HOA meeting under the pretense of neighborhood safety. We made it sound like a celebration. Karen would be invited to lead so she could bask in her fake glory, unaware that she would be walking straight into a fully documented arrest. The days leading up to the meeting were a strange balancing act. Karen became unbearable. She stood in her driveway chatting loudly with groups of HOA loyalists, spinning wild stories about my supposed drug empire. According to her, I was running some kind of major operation from my garage, and my visitors were clearly criminal associates. Of course, I had no visitors at all except the occasional Amazon delivery. I overheard snippets about how she had always suspected I was shady because I did not participate in neighborhood potlucks, and because my grass looked too healthy, like I was hiding something under it. If the situation were not so serious, it would have been hysterical. What Karen did not realize was that her constant gossip was making her look increasingly unhinged to the quieter majority of residents. People who had lived in Willow Creek for years started whispering that maybe Karen had gone too far this time. I saw glances cast my way that shifted from wary to apologetic. Seeds of doubt were sprouting, and I watered them subtly by continuing to act polite, reserved, and just a little embarrassed whenever I crossed paths with anyone. It was all about letting Karen spin out her narrative without any real opposition until it collapsed under its own weight. Meanwhile, I upgraded the security around my property, not because I was worried but because I needed a failsafe. Extra cameras, motion sensors linked directly to my agency network, even a couple of hidden audio bugs placed strategically around my front yard. I had no intention of letting Karen slip away on a technicality. Every word, every move was being logged. I even made sure to document the growing pile of HOA notices that continued to appear on my door, each more ridiculous than the last. My favorite was a violation for improper mailbox posture, citing that my mailbox leaned 1.3 degrees to the left, a violation punishable by a $75 fine. The night before the emergency meeting, I sat on my back porch, sipping a cup of black coffee and going over everything one last time. Karen thought she was about to be crowned neighborhood hero, maybe even get her own little plaque installed in the clubhouse. Instead, she was about to face public humiliation, the kind that would make her name infamous, not just in Willow Creek, but probably in the local news. I thought about all the people she had likely bullied over the years, the families she had driven away with her fake moral crusade. Tomorrow was not just about clearing my name, it was about delivering justice for all of them too. As I finished my coffee, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Sure enough, there was Karen pacing at the edge of my property line, pretending to walk her dog, but really peeking over my fence like a nosy toddler. I smiled to myself, letting her see me wave casually before turning back inside. Let her think she had won. Let her wallow in that false victory for one more night. Because when the sun rose tomorrow, it would not just be another day in Willow Creek Estate. It would be the day Karen learned the hard way that some people are not meant to be messed with. And I was about to teach her that lesson in front of everyone she had ever tried to impress. The morning of the emergency meeting arrived with a buzz of excitement in the air. Willow Creek Estates had never seen this much activity outside the annual bake sale. Cars lined the streets earlier than usual, and neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering and exchanging rumors about the big announcement Karen had promised to unveil. I played my role perfectly, keeping my expression tense, my body language guarded. Karen strutted around the clubhouse parking lot like a general before a victory parade. She wore a red blazer today, probably her idea of power dressing, and carried a thick folder stuffed with documents she clearly intended to use as props for her speech. She was so convinced of her upcoming coronation that she barely noticed the two unmarked police SUVs parked discreetly near the tennis courts. Inside the clubhouse, the air was electric. Rows of metal chairs had been set up facing a makeshift podium draped in an American flag. Karen's doing, of course, to give the event a sense of false patriotism. The room was about half full, a mix of loyalists eager to cheer Karen on and skeptics who were just there to see what fresh madness would unfold. I took a seat near the back, keeping my head low and my baseball cap pulled down just enough to appear sullen and defeated. It was important Karen still believed she had broken me. At exactly 10 o'clock, Karen clapped her hands for attention and marched to the podium. She tapped the microphone several times even though it was working fine and launched into a rambling speech about community values, vigilance, and the importance of standing up to criminal elements even when it was uncomfortable. She framed herself as a lone soldier battling evil, casting sideways glances at me every few minutes to really hammer the point home. She even wiped away a fake tear as she described the danger she had put herself in to protect the neighborhood's children. The neighbors exchanged glances, some nodding, others fidgeting awkwardly. It was clear that Karen was losing her audience the longer she spoke. Her melodrama was suffocating. Finally, when she reached the crescendo of her speech, she theatrically pulled out the baggie she had planted on my lawn, now carefully sealed in an evidence pouch. She held it up like a trophy, her voice shaking with fake emotion as she declared that thanks to her bravery the community was safe again. That was the cue. Officer Daniels stepped forward from the side of the room where he had been pretending to set up chairs. His badge glinted in the fluorescent lights as he raised his voice, announcing that the meeting was now an active investigation scene. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen blinked, confused, her hand still clutching the evidence pouch in midair. Officer Ruiz approached from the other side, flanking her with calm authority. They informed Karen that she was under investigation for evidence tampering, false reporting, harassment, and obstruction of justice. At first Karen tried to laugh it off, waving her hand and declaring there must be some mistake. She pointed at me, yelling that the real criminal was getting away. Her voice rose in pitch, hysterical now, as Officer Daniels calmly handcuffed her. The evidence pouch slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft smack. The room fell silent except for Karen's shrieking protest. It was a beautiful moment, the kind of raw, unscripted justice that no amount of spin could undo. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as Karen was led out of the clubhouse. A few people began whispering excitedly, others pulling out their phones to record the spectacle. As she passed by me, Karen locked eyes with mine, pure hatred burning in her glare. I met it with a cold, steady look. For a split second, I saw something crack inside her, the realization that she had not just lost, she had destroyed herself. It was not anger that filled me in that moment, but a quiet, complete satisfaction. Once Karen was in custody and the clubhouse began to empty out, I met with Officer Daniels and handed over copies of all the surveillance footage and recordings I had compiled. The case against her was airtight, and there were already plans to interview every neighbor she had targeted over the years. As the investigation unfolded, we discovered even more evidence of Karen's reign of terror. She had filed dozens of false complaints against families she did not like, accused teenagers of vandalism without proof, even tried to blackmail the previous HOA president into resigning so she could take power. The HOA board, now thoroughly disgraced, dissolved itself within days. A temporary oversight committee was appointed by the city to manage the community until a new election could be held. I declined every suggestion that I run for president. The last thing I wanted was to swap one nightmare for another. Besides, I had other work to get back to once this sideshow wrapped up. News of Karen's arrest spread like wildfire. Local news stations ran segments titled Vigilante HOA President Arrested in Shocking Frame Job. Social media exploded with memes of Karen's mugshot photoshopped onto superhero posters with captions like Captain Karen Defender of Overreach. My favorite was a doctored photo showing her trying to scale a neighbor's fence with the caption, "No law too small, no privacy too sacred." The story even caught the attention of national outlets who ran it as a light-hearted human interest piece. In the weeks that followed, life in Willow Creek Estates changed drastically. The fear that had once hung over the community like a smog lifted. People started holding real community events again, casual barbecues and kids' bike parades without worrying about arbitrary fines or surveillance. Neighbors who had barely spoken to one another before bonded over shared relief. A kind of solidarity grew from the ashes of Karen's reign. As for Karen, she faced multiple charges with serious consequences. Her attempts to paint herself as a victim fell flat when confronted with overwhelming evidence. She tried to mount a defense claiming she was acting in the public's best interest, but it only made her look more delusional. Eventually, she accepted a plea deal that included jail time, hefty fines, and a permanent ban from serving on any community boards or associations. I stayed under the radar as much as possible, content to let the neighborhood heal on its own. Every once in a while someone would stop me on the street and thank me in hushed tones. I always waved it off, insisting I was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time. But deep down, I knew the truth. Sometimes justice does not come with a grand jury or a SWAT team. Sometimes it starts with a nosy neighbor, a plastic bag, and the patience to let a villain destroy themselves one bad decision at a time. The fallout from Karen's arrest was even bigger than anyone expected. In the first few days after the meeting, the HOA board tried to salvage their reputation by issuing formal apologies, but it was like throwing a teacup of water onto a forest fire. Nobody trusted them anymore. Residents demanded a full audit of the HOA's activities over the past 5 years, and what emerged was even worse than the rumors. Karen had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, disguising them as community improvement. She had hired her friends for fake landscaping contracts, filed bogus repair claims, and even billed the HOA for her personal travel expenses under the pretext of attending national HOA conventions. It turned out there were no conventions, just beach resorts and spa weekends for Karen and her little circle of loyalists. As the investigation widened, the city's Department of Community Affairs got involved. A full audit team was sent to Willow Creek, and the more they dug, the more they found. Falsified records, improper elections, and intimidation tactics against anyone who dared run against Karen in previous years. Several of her closest allies resigned before they could be formally removed, but that did not save them from legal trouble. Civil suits popped up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Homeowners who had been unfairly fined or harassed banded together to file a class action lawsuit. It was no longer about one bad neighbor. It was about years of abuse finally being dragged into the light. Meanwhile, Karen's own situation was deteriorating fast. Sitting in county jail awaiting trial, she apparently tried to rally other inmates into forming a facility improvement committee, demanding better conditions. She got shut down so hard by the prison warden that the story leaked to the press, giving everyone yet another round of schadenfreude at her expense. Her attempts to play the martyr only made things worse. When she hired a high-priced defense attorney to argue that she was mentally unfit to stand trial, it backfired spectacularly. The court ordered a psychological evaluation, which concluded that while Karen exhibited extreme narcissistic tendencies, she was fully capable of understanding right from wrong. In other words, she was just mean, not insane. Back in the neighborhood, things took a surprising turn. Without the HOA's oppressive rules breathing down their necks, people actually started taking more pride in their homes, not less. Front yards bloomed with colorful flowers, kids played in sprinklers, homemade lemonade stands popped up on street corners. The atmosphere changed from Stepford wife creepy to lively and authentic. A group of long-term residents organized a block party to celebrate the new era. They even joked about creating a new HOA motto: freedom, not fines. Someone designed t-shirts with a cartoon of a broken clipboard and the words "No More Karens in Willow Creek." I was dragged to the party despite my protests, and ended up flipping burgers while neighbors who had once avoided me lined up to shake my hand. Despite the goodwill, I remained cautious. I knew from experience that public opinion was fickle, and it would not take much for someone else to get power-hungry. That is why I quietly met with a few of the most level-headed neighbors to help draft a new set of community guidelines, ones based on basic courtesy and fairness instead of Karen's draconian rules. We kept the essentials like no parking on sidewalks, but scrapped the ridiculous ones about lawn color shades and mailbox angles. We even included a clause stating that no future HOA official could act unilaterally without majority approval from homeowners. Democracy finally returned to Willow Creek. One afternoon about 2 months after the infamous meeting, I got an unexpected delivery. A large cardboard box with no return address sat on my porch. Suspicious, I checked it carefully, first instinct always kicking in. When I opened it, I found a massive life-sized cardboard cutout of Karen dressed in a jail jumpsuit with a cartoon speech bubble saying I got busted. Attached was a handwritten note from the neighbors thanking me for standing up when they were too scared to. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the thing. Against my better judgment, I placed it on my porch for a few hours where passing cars honked and people doubled over in laughter. Even the mailman gave me a thumbs up. It would have been easy to feel smug or victorious, but honestly I mostly felt relieved. Willow Creek had become a powder keg, and if Karen had not been stopped, things could have gotten much worse. I knew from my professional experience how small tyrannies sometimes escalated into bigger dangers if left unchecked. In a way, I was lucky that the worst she managed was a sloppy drug planting instead of something truly destructive. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a community had been saved from itself. Still, not everything was rosy. Karen's trial was upcoming, and despite the mountain of evidence, there was always a chance she might try to strike back legally or through some dirty tactic. I made sure my agency kept tabs on any unusual activity around the neighborhood and kept my security systems live and constantly monitored. Complacency was the enemy. The goal was not revenge. It was vigilance. That was something Karen would never understand. Real authority came with responsibility, not power trip. In a final hilarious twist, just before her trial, Karen filed a frivolous lawsuit against me claiming defamation, emotional distress, and loss of earning potential. Her claim stated that because of my actions, she could never again serve on a homeowners association or any similar body. My lawyer did not even have to work hard. Karen had accidentally attached screenshots of her own bragging messages and videos from the night she planted evidence showing her committing the crimes she now denied. The judge tossed out her lawsuit in less than 5 minutes and fined her for wasting the court's time. Word got around quickly, and soon Karen became a cautionary tale taught at local HOA seminars as an example of how not to behave. Life at Willow Creek settled into a new normal. Kids rode their bikes without fear of Karen jumping out from behind a bush to lecture them. Parents actually used the community clubhouse for birthday parties and yoga classes without ridiculous rental fees. Holidays became vibrant again with elaborate decorations that would have sent Karen into a spiral. Freedom was messy and colorful, and sometimes a little loud, but it was alive. And for the first time since moving in, I felt like I belonged, not because of fear or conformity, but because of genuine community spirit. I sometimes thought about Karen sitting alone in her cell surrounded by gray walls with no neighborhood to rule over, no clipboard to clutch, no one to intimidate. She had built her own prison long before she ever stepped into a real one. And the best part was she had done it all to herself while thinking she was winning. That was the real victory. Not the headlines or the memes or even the trial, but the simple truth that when given enough rope, people like Karen always find a way to hang themselves. And all it took was a little patience, a steady hand, and a front row seat to watch karma work its slow, beautiful magic. The morning of Karen's trial arrived on a cool, clear day that felt almost too perfect for what was about to unfold. I drove to the courthouse early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to watch every second of it. The place buzzed with quiet excitement as reporters lined the steps and local residents trickled in, clutching their coffees and whispering among themselves. Willow Creek Estates had effectively emptied out for the day. People took personal days from work just to witness the spectacle firsthand. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with anticipation. Karen sat at the defendant's table, wearing a stiff navy blue blazer, her hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She avoided eye contact with everyone, keeping her gaze fixed on some invisible point ahead, as if pretending the audience did not exist. Her attorney, a grim-faced man who clearly knew he had been handed a losing case, shuffled papers nervously beside her. The prosecution opened strong, presenting a simple, devastating case. Surveillance footage from multiple angles showed Karen planting the drugs in my yard. Audio recordings captured her bragging about setting me up. The police bodycam footage from the day of her fake discovery showed her orchestrating the scene with glee. They even played clips from the emergency meeting where she proudly held up the planted evidence while giving her bizarre speech. The evidence was overwhelming, a tidal wave she could not swim against. Karen's lawyer tried to argue that she was under emotional duress, that she genuinely believed she was protecting the community, but it fell flat. Every smug grin, every self-congratulatory comment she had made in the recordings painted her as someone who knew exactly what she was doing and enjoyed it. I testified briefly, simply laying out the facts without embellishment. I could feel Karen's eyes boring into the side of my head as I spoke, but I refused to look at her. She had wasted enough of my time. The prosecutor finished by pointing out that Karen had not just tried to frame an innocent man, but had abused her authority for years, creating a climate of fear and hostility in a place meant to be a peaceful community. Her actions were not a momentary lapse in judgment, they were part of a pattern of deliberate, calculated behavior. The defense called Karen to the stand in a last-ditch effort to salvage some sympathy. It was a mistake. Karen took the stand and within minutes unraveled any chance she had left. She painted herself as a misunderstood hero, claimed that the community was ungrateful for her sacrifices, and insisted that her only crime was caring too much. Her words dripped with entitlement and bitterness. Several jurors visibly cringed as she ranted about how difficult it was to find good neighbors anymore. By the time she stepped down, the outcome was all but sealed. It took the jury less than 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. When the judge read the decision, Karen's face remained frozen for a moment before crumpling into a mask of rage and disbelief. She shouted at the judge, accused the prosecutors of conspiring against her, and even tried to fire her lawyer mid-sentencing. The bailiffs had to escort her out of the courtroom as she screamed about how she was the real victim. Cameras caught every second, and by nightfall the footage was all over the news and social media. Karen had finally achieved the fame she so desperately craved, but not in the way she ever imagined. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a month later. In that time, Karen's story became legend. Memes flooded the internet. Someone created a parody HOA website listing her as the founder of the Neighborhood Oppression Association. Late-night talk shows made jokes about how even prison wardens were probably forming support groups to deal with her. Willow Creek residents basked in the afterglow of vindication, but they also moved forward determined not to let one person's tyranny define them. When sentencing day arrived, the courtroom was again packed. The judge sentenced Karen to 5 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 3 years, citing her complete lack of remorse and the damage she had done to the community. In addition, she was ordered to pay substantial restitution to the victims of her harassment, including fines, damages, and court costs. The final blow came when the judge barred her permanently from holding any position of authority in any homeowners association, condo board, or similar community organization for the rest of her life. It was poetic justice at its finest. After the sentencing, neighbors gathered outside the courthouse cheering and clapping as the bailiffs led Karen away in cuffs. I stayed back watching quietly from a distance. I felt no joy in her misery, only a deep sense of closure. Karen had built her kingdom on lies, manipulation, and fear. And in the end it had collapsed under its own weight, just as it was always destined to. Life at Willow Creek continued to blossom without her. The community elections held a few weeks later were light-hearted and democratic. People actually campaigned with funny posters and homemade slogans. A retired teacher named Mrs. Jensen was elected president by a landslide, promising transparency, kindness, and lots of potluck. The difference was night and day. Where once the neighborhood had lived under Karen's iron fist, now it thrived with laughter, children's games, and neighborly cooperation. As for me, I decided to extend my stay a little longer. My cover as the quiet accountant remained intact, and the community accepted me more warmly than ever. I still kept my skills sharp, my instincts tuned, but for the first time in a long time, I found myself relaxing, genuinely enjoying the simple pleasures of suburban life. Mowing the lawn, chatting with neighbors, fixing up the garage, hosting the occasional barbecue. Normalcy tasted sweeter after everything we had endured. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Willow Creek, I sat on my porch, a cold drink in hand, and watched as kids chased each other down the sidewalk, chalk drawings blooming on driveways. Across the street, Mrs. Jensen planted new flowers by the clubhouse sign, a project the entire neighborhood had voted on. The clubhouse itself now hosted art classes, family movie nights, and book clubs instead of closed-door meetings and secret fines. It was not perfect. No place ever is. But it was real, honest, and ours. Sometimes people ask if I would do anything differently if I could go back. The truth is no. Every step, every confrontation, every ounce of patience and restraint had led to this moment. Karen had thought she was unbeatable, unstoppable, the queen of her tiny empire. But in the end it was not a badge or a gun that brought her down. It was the truth. And sometimes that is all you need. Not force, not fury, just the steady, unstoppable power of truth and a community that refuses to stay silent. As the stars blinked on overhead and the warm breeze rustled through the trees, I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Karen was gone. Willow Creek was free. And for the first time in a long time, everything was exactly where it should be.